My name is Carlos, and I never meant to become the kind of man who sits in silence, replaying one story over and over in his mind. But some stories don't let you go. They stay under your skin, like a lingering echo or a whisper you can't quite shut out. This is one of those stories. It began with a headline about a billionaire, a sick child, and a lawsuit against one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country. But that isn't why it stayed with me. It stayed because of the Maid, the woman nobody saw coming. I first heard about Ethan Marlowe in the business section of a newspaper. Tech giant, real estate mogul, visionary. People threw big words at him the way kids throw confetti at parades. He owned towers of glass in New York, private islands in the Caribbean, and a mansion on the outskirts of the city that looked more like a modern fortress than a home. From the outside, his life was a success story carved in marble and money. But the first time I drove up to the Marlowe estate, the place felt wrong. The iron gates opened with a low metallic groan. I remember the crunch of gravel under the tires, the way the trees lining the driveway stood tall and perfectly trimmed, as if even nature itself had been ordered to behave. The house appeared at the end of the path, white stone, black glass, sharp edges reflecting a sky heavy with grey clouds. A fountain in the front yard sent water in a precise arc, the sound crisp and rhythmic. It should have felt impressive. It felt cold. When I stepped out of the car, the wind carried the faint smell of wet earth and cut grass. Somewhere far off, I heard a dog bark once and then fall silent. No laughter, no music, no signs of a child. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood, floral cleaner, and something else I didn't recognize at first, antiseptic, like a hospital trying to hide behind expensive perfume. My footsteps echoed softly on the marble floor. Staff moved through the corridors with quiet efficiency, eyes down, shoulders slightly tense. They nodded politely when they passed, but they didn't smile. It was as if someone had ordered silence and everyone obeyed. Ethan Marlowe appeared at the top of the staircase, descending with the kind of practiced control that only men used to being watched can manage. Up close, he looked exactly like his photos. Tailored suit, sharp jaw, salt and pepper hair perfectly in place. But his eyes betrayed him. They were tired in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. They were the eyes of someone who had been bargaining with God for far too long and getting no answer. "Carlos," he said, extending his hand, "thank you for coming." His voice was smooth, but there was a tightness in it, a strain he couldn't quite hide. I shook his hand. His grip was firm and cold. "You said you wanted the story told honestly," I replied. "That's the only way I know how to do it." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Honestly," he repeated, like the word hurt a little. "That's why I called you." We walked down a long hallway, lined with art that probably cost more than most people's houses. The smell of antiseptic grew stronger with each step. At the end of the corridor, there was a door slightly ajar. Light spilled out from inside, soft and artificial. Ethan paused, his hand hovering over the handle. "He's inside," he said quietly. "My son." The room smelled like a strange mix of hospital and childhood, disinfectant, plastic, a hint of talcum powder, and the faint sugary scent of candy wrappers left too long in a drawer. Machines lined one wall, nothing dramatic, no loud beeping, just quiet monitors and equipment neatly arranged as if waiting to be needed. Near the window, in a large bed covered with navy blue sheets, sat a boy. His name was Noah. He was 10 years old, with dark hair that fell over his forehead and big brown eyes that seemed too serious for his age. A faint bandage wrapped around the top of his head, almost hidden by his hair. He was focused on a small toy truck in his hands, moving it back and forth slowly, not making engine noises, not smiling. The window behind him let in a pale, tired light that painted everything in shades of grey. "Noah," Ethan said softly, "this is Carlos. He's here to listen." The boy looked up at me. For a second, something like curiosity flickered in his gaze. Then he nodded once, shyly, and returned his eyes to the truck. His fingers moved, but the movement was small, almost careful. "There's a wound on his scalp," Ethan explained, his voice low. "It started as a small bump. We went to the hospital. They said it was nothing. Then it got worse. We went to specialists. They said it was a skin infection. They prescribed creams, antibiotics. We did everything. It just never really healed." As he spoke, my eyes drifted back to the bandage. At a distance it looked clean, but the air near Noah carried a faint sour note beneath the antiseptic. You had to be close to notice. You had to be paying attention. How long? I asked. Almost a year, Ethan replied. A year. My chest tightened. I glanced at Noah again. A year is a lifetime when you're 10. We were in and out of hospitals, Ethan continued. They gave it names I couldn't even pronounce. Dermatitis, chronic infection, autoimmune reaction. They took tests. They charged me more money than some families see in 10 years. Every month there was a new treatment, a new cream, a new pill. And every time they said the same thing. It's complicated, but we're managing it. He swallowed, staring at his son. But it never really got better. I noticed something then. Noah's hand drifted up to the side of his head. Not the dramatic, exaggerated touch of a child seeking attention, but a small, quick movement, like a habit. His fingers brushed over the bandage, hesitated, then pulled away, as if touching it hurt or disgusted him. A tiny flinch crossed his face. You could miss it if you weren't watching closely. I wasn't the only one watching. She stood quietly near the back of the room, almost blending into the shadows. If Ethan hadn't turned to introduce her, I might have mistaken her for part of the furniture, the quiet kind of presence people get used to ignoring. But once I looked at her, it was hard to look away. Her name was Maria. She wore a simple, dark blue uniform, her hair pulled back into a low bun. Her hands were clasped in front of her, fingers intertwined as if she was trying to hold herself together. In her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen anywhere else in that house. Raw, unfiltered concern. "This is Maria," Ethan said. "She takes care of Noah when the nurses aren't here. She's been with us for a little over 6 months." Maria nodded politely, but her gaze drifted back to the boy almost immediately, like a compass finding north. There was something in that look that went beyond duty. It looked like love. "Mr. Marlowe," she said softly, "Noah needs his rest. Maybe just a few more minutes." Her voice carried a gentle firmness. She didn't sound like an employee begging, but like someone advocating for the child. Ethan exhaled and nodded. "Of course. We won't stay long." As he spoke to Noah again, I watched Maria. Her attention was split, half on the boy, half on the bandage. Every time his hand moved instinctively toward his head, hers moved too, as if ready to stop him, to protect him. When he flinched, her jaw tightened. She had seen that flinch more times than she could count. Later, when we stepped out into the hallway, leaving Noah to rest, I finally turned to her. "You've been here for 6 months," I said. "You've seen a lot." She hesitated, glancing toward Ethan. He was a few steps ahead, rubbing his temples as if trying to massage away a migraine that had settled into his skull, and refused to leave. "Yes," she replied quietly. "I've seen enough." Her accent was soft, her English careful, but clear. There was a hint of something melodic in the way she spoke, like she'd grown up hearing prayers whispered in another language. We walked to a sitting room where a tray of untouched coffee rested on a glass table. The smell was rich and bitter. No one moved to drink it. Outside, the sky had darkened further, clouds pressing low, heavy with unfallen rain. The room was quiet, too quiet for a house that big. The only sound was the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. "Carlos," Ethan began, sinking into an armchair, "I didn't ask you here just to write about a sick child. I asked you here because something happened, something I still don't fully understand." He stared at the floor for a long moment, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles turned white. "For almost a year, the best doctors in this city told me they were doing everything, that they couldn't find a clear cause, that Noah's body was just resistant to treatment. I believed them. I trusted their degrees, their titles, their confidence. I threw money at the problem. I flew him to specialists. I signed whatever papers they put in front of me." He lifted his head slowly, and when his eyes met mine, there was a haunted look there. "And then," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "one day Maria came to me and told me she thought they were all wrong." I glanced at her. She stood near the doorway, hands folded, head slightly bowed. But her eyes, they were steady, unafraid. Reflection. That was the moment when a billionaire's certainty first collided with the quiet courage of a woman the world would simply call the Maid. So I didn't know it then, but everything in this story, everything that would shake hospitals and courtrooms and the heart of a very rich man, would begin with what she noticed on a normal afternoon, when the smell in that little boy's room changed, the wound on his head pulsed with a different kind of pain, and a prayer rose in her chest that would not let her stay silent. That was the day when the wound on Noah's head stopped being just a stubborn infection and became something far more disturbing. That was the day the maid realized the problem inside that child's head was not just a wound, it was alive, and that discovery would change everything. The days before everything exploded didn't look dramatic from the outside. They looked normal, or at least the kind of normal that money can buy when something is deeply wrong and everyone is pretending it isn't. I kept visiting the Marlowe estate, collecting details, listening to Ethan tell his version of events, but the more time I spent there, the more I realized that if I wanted the truth, I needed to watch Noah, and I needed to watch Maria. Mornings in that house started quietly. The sun would rise behind the tall glass windows, casting thin stripes of light across the polished floors. The kitchen staff moved like a well-rehearsed dance, coffee brewing, bread in the oven, plates arranged with precision. The smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread filled the air, but most of it went untouched. From where I sat at the edge of the dining room, I could see Ethan at the head of the long table, a tablet in front of him, reports and numbers glowing in cool blue light. His breakfast sat to his right, eggs, fruit, perfectly cut toast, growing cold. His phone buzzed occasionally. He answered some calls, ignored others. His eyes were on the numbers, but his mind wasn't fully there. You could tell by the way his fingers sometimes stopped mid-swipe, and his gaze drifted toward the hallway that led to his son's room. Every morning around 8, Noah would appear. He'd walk in wearing soft cotton pajamas or sweatpants, his hair a little messy, the bandage carefully wrapped around his head. A nurse usually accompanied him, hovering just behind. The boy walked slowly, as if each step cost him something. Sometimes he kept one hand hovering close to his head, not touching, just ready. "Hey, champ," Ethan would say, forcing a smile. "How are you feeling this morning?" Noah would shrug or sign a small so-so with his fingers. He rarely used many words around his father. It wasn't that he disliked him. It was more like he didn't know how to bridge the distance between them. Maria usually stood at the kitchen doorway during these exchanges, pretending to wipe a counter or straighten a chair, but her eyes were always on Noah. She noticed when he didn't sit quite right in his chair. She noticed when he pushed his food around instead of eating it. She noticed when he flinched at a sudden movement from the nurse's hand near his bandage. One particular morning is burned into my memory. The smell hit me first. It was faint, hidden beneath the stronger sense of breakfast, but it was there, a slightly sweet, slightly rotten odor that didn't belong in a pristine million-dollar kitchen. My nose wrinkled. I glanced around. The garbage can was closed. The fridge door was sealed. The fruit on the counter looked fresh. Noah slid into his usual chair, and as he lowered his head, a strand of hair shifted away from his bandage. The smell got stronger. Maria's hand, which had been reaching for a dish towel, froze mid-air. Her eyes sharpened, instinctively locked onto the boy. I saw the tension in her jaw as she inhaled, then exhaled slowly, her face composed but her gaze troubled. "Eat something, son," Ethan urged. "You need your energy." Noah picked up a piece of toast and took a small bite, his movements slow and careful. The nurse poured him some juice, her expression neutral, professional. When she leaned in to adjust his chair, a small crease formed between her brows. She smelled it too, but she said nothing. Later in the hallway, when the nurse had gone to fetch medication and Ethan had disappeared into his office to join a video call, I saw Maria standing just outside Noah's room. Her hand rested on the doorframe, her head bowed slightly. I approached quietly. "You noticed it too, didn't you?" I asked. She looked up, startled. Then she nodded. "It's different," she murmured. "The smell, it wasn't like this before." "Have you said anything to the doctor?" I asked. Her eyes darkened. "I tried. Last week. I told him Noah was scratching more, that sometimes at night he whimpers in his sleep and reaches for his head. The doctor said it's psychological discomfort, that the boy is anxious and focusing on the wound. He gave another prescription cream." There was a hint of frustration in her voice now, tightly contained. Reflection. In that house, the people with the most power spoke with the most certainty, but the people who watched the child suffer spoke with the most truth. She took a slow breath. "You don't agree?" I asked gently. Her eyes flicked toward Noah's door. "I may not have a degree, Mr. Carlos, but I know when something in a body is wrong. My grandmother used to say, 'The body talks. You just have to listen, child.' I've been listening." "What is it saying?" I asked. She hesitated. "Pain. And something else. I don't know the word in English. In my village, when a wound smells like that, we say it is not alone. The phrase sent a chill down my spine. Not alone? She nodded. Like something is living inside. I thought of stories I'd heard. Medical cases from remote regions, infestations, parasitic infections, rare conditions you don't expect to see in wealthy suburbs. For most people, they're the kind of stories you read once and forget. For Maria, they were memories. That night I stayed longer than usual. The house changed after dark. The expensive lamps cast pools of warm light in the hallways, but the spaces between them filled with heavy shadows. Staff retreated to their quarters. The kitchen quieted. The fountain's steady splash outside the window became louder, a low, hypnotic rhythm. From down the corridor, I heard Noah's voice, a muffled whimper, barely audible. I followed the sound. His bedroom door was slightly open. The room was lit by a small lamp beside his bed, casting a soft glow over the navy sheets and scattered toys. Noah lay curled on his side, one hand pressed against the bandage. His face was twisted in pain, eyes squeezed shut. Maria sat on the edge of the bed, her hand hovering just above his, not daring to touch the wound but not willing to move away either. She was whispering in her native language, words I didn't understand but felt anyway. They sounded like a prayer. "It hurts," Noah murmured, his voice breaking. "It burns." "I know, Mewanjo, I know," she whispered. "I'm here. I won't leave you." Tears glistened in the corners of his eyes. He flinched again, and as he moved, the smell in the room shifted, hit me like a quiet wave. Stronger now, undeniably foul, like a mixture of infection and something spoiled. I swallowed hard. "Has anyone examined it today?" I asked softly. Maria glanced at me, then at the nightstand. A small white tube of cream sat there, its label covered in medical jargon. "The doctor's assistant came," she said. "He looked from a distance. He said it was expected irritation. He told me not to worry." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "But I am worried." Noah whimpered again, his fingers twitching against the bandage. Maria took his other hand and held it gently. "Do you remember what your grandmother taught you?" she asked him softly. "When you feel scared, pray," he whispered. She smiled sadly. "That's right. You can pray in your heart, and I'll pray out loud, okay?" He nodded weakly. As she prayed, I watched her closely. Her free hand trembled, not from lack of faith, but from the weight of responsibility she felt, with no authority to act. She had seen enough in her life to recognize danger, and she had seen enough in this house to know that if she spoke too loudly, the people in charge would tell her to be quiet. Downstairs, the doctor's latest report lay on Ethan's desk. Pages of technical language, confident conclusions, words like chronic, complex, under control. Ethan had shown it to me earlier, almost defensively, as if trying to convince himself. "They say it's rare but manageable," he'd said. "They say we just need to be patient." Now, listening to Noah's soft moans and Maria's whispered prayer, manageable, sounded like an insult. Later, when Noah finally drifted into an exhausted sleep, Maria stepped into the hallway. Her shoulders sagged. She looked smaller there under the dim light. "Why don't you push harder?" I asked her quietly. "Why don't you insist more with the doctors?" She gave a sad little laugh. "I'm just the maid, senor. In places like this, they don't listen to women like me, especially when men in white coats are so sure." "You spoke to Ethan?" I pressed. She hesitated. "Not yet. He scares me a little. Not because he is evil, because he is desperate. Desperate men cling to the most expensive answers. I am not expensive. I clean floors." Her honesty cut deeper than any accusation. Reflection. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in a rich man's life is not the problem he has, but who he chooses to trust to solve it. The next day, the conflict escalated. The hospital called. They wanted to schedule another procedure, something exploratory. More tests, more sedatives, more money. Ethan paced his office as he murmured into the phone, his voice shifting between polite, confused and frustrated. "This is the third exploratory procedure in 5 months," he said. "You told me the last one would give us clarity. I don't understand what's changing." Silence on the other end. Then more jargon, more reassurances, more promises. When he hung up, he found Maria in the corridor outside, carrying a basket of freshly laundered sheets. The smell of detergent and sun-dried cotton followed her. "Mr. Marlowe," she said softly, "may I speak to you?" He looked at her, already tense. I'm in the middle of... It's about Noah, she interrupted, her voice trembling a little but steady. Please, he sighed, rubbing his temples. What now? Did he have another bad night? Yes, she said, but it's not just that. The wound. It smells different. It looks different. I think there is more going on than infection. His eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? She swallowed. I have seen something like this before, not here, in my village when I was a child. A boy had a wound that wouldn't heal. The doctors in the city said it was stubborn infection, but the elders, they knew it was something else. Flies lay eggs in open wounds, senor. Larvae grow there. They eat the flesh. In my country we call it myiasis, a living infestation. The word hung in the air like a dark cloud. Ethan's face hardened. Are you telling me my son has worms in his head? She flinched at his tone. I'm saying it is possible. The smell, the way he reacts, the constant movement under the bandage. Sometimes, when I change the cloth, I see... Enough, he snapped. You are not a doctor, Maria. You are a housekeeper. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I know what I am, senor, but I also know what I have seen. Please, ask them to check for this. Ask them to look more closely. What if you are wrong, he cut in. Do you have any idea how much I've spent? How many specialists have examined him? You think a team of surgeons missed something so simple and only you saw it? Do you realize how ridiculous that sounds? Her shoulders trembled. Sometimes the simple thing is exactly what people miss, she whispered. His frustration boiled over. I will not march into that hospital and embarrass myself with a diagnosis you picked up from childhood stories. I trust my doctors, Maria. They know what they're doing. She blinked rapidly, trying to keep the tears from spilling. And I trust what God shows me, she said quietly. I'm not trying to be right, senor. I'm trying to save your son. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Ethan looked away, jaw clenched. Go back to your duties, he said coldly. Leave the medical decisions to professionals. She lowered her head. Yes, senor, she murmured. But as she turned to leave, I didn't see defeat in her eyes. I saw a decision forming. She couldn't prove she was right. She couldn't force anyone to listen. But she could do one thing. Stay close to Noah. Watch him. Pray. Wait for the moment when her intuition would no longer be something Ethan could ignore. That moment came sooner than any of us expected. Reflection. Fear makes us cling to the most expensive lies and doubt the cheapest truth. Before I continue, let me speak to you directly for a second. If you're still here, if this story is stirring something in you, please like this video, subscribe, and share in the comments if you've ever felt ignored when you knew something was wrong. Your voice might be someone else's miracle, because in that house the only person really listening to Noah's pain was the one everyone kept telling to stay quiet. The next week felt like watching a storm gather on the horizon, knowing it was coming for you but not knowing exactly when it would break. Noah's condition seemed to hover in a cruel in-between. Some days, he had enough strength to play quietly in his room, lining up his toy cars or drawing crooked little houses and stick figures. Other days he stayed in bed, eyes half closed, fingers absent-mindedly scratching at the edges of his bandage, until Maria gently took his hand away. The smell grew worse. By now, anyone who entered his room could sense it, a thick, sweet, rotten scent that clung to the air and refused to leave, no matter how many times the windows were opened or the surfaces disinfected. The nurse began spraying light perfume on her wrists, hoping it would help. It didn't. If anything, it made the contrast more jarring, the clash of artificial flowers and something decaying. Each time the doctor visited, he stood at a distance, his expression composed. It's a stubborn infection, he repeated. We see this with certain patients. His immune response is unusual, but we're managing. These things take time. Ethan clung to those words like a drowning man clings to driftwood. Time, he muttered one evening, staring at the latest invoice. They keep asking for more time. Downstairs, the grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, indifferent to his pain. The rhythm burrowed into my mind. Tick. Another day of pills and creams. Tick. Another night of Noah's muffled whimpers. Tick. Another visit where Maria watched everything and spoke less, saving her words for the one she prayed to when the house fell silent. One afternoon, I found her alone in the laundry room. The smell of detergent hung heavy in the air. Warm sheets fresh from the dryer sat in a basket. Sunlight filtered in through a small window, catching dust motes in the air like tiny floating stars. Maria stood by the ironing board, but she wasn't ironing. Her hands rested on the edge, her knuckles white. "Are you okay?" I asked. She startled, then relaxed when she saw it was me. "Yes," she said automatically. Then she shook her head. "No." I waited. She took a shaky breath. "Last night when I changed Noah's bandage, I saw something. It was small, I thought maybe. My mind was playing tricks. Today I saw it again. Tiny. White. Moving. My stomach twisted." "You're sure?" She nodded, eyes filling. "I didn't pull the bandage completely. Just enough to check for blood. There was a little. And them," her voice cracked. "They are eating him, senor." A chill ran down my spine. "Did you tell the nurse?" "I did," she replied. "She said I was mistaken, that what I saw were dried pieces of medicine or skin. She said I was overly anxious. Then she told the doctor I was agitating the environment." There was a bitter edge to her voice now. "Thought, in a house filled with intelligence and money, the one person allowed to define reality was the one with the most letters after his name, not the one with the most contact with the child." "Why don't you take a photo?" I suggested quietly. "Evidence." She looked at me with a mix of hope and fear. "Would that change anything?" "It might," I said. "Some men believe in proof more than they believe in people." That night, the house felt tense. Ethan had spent the afternoon on calls with the hospital, arguing over treatment plans, timelines, projected outcomes. His voice echoed down the hallway, rising and falling between anger and exhaustion. When he finally hung up, he poured himself a drink at the bar, swirling the amber liquid in the glass, as if the answers might appear in its reflection. Down the hall, Noah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His eyes were glassy. The lamp beside him cast a warm glow over his face, highlighting the dark circles under his eyes. Maria sat beside him, a small bowl of water and a clean cloth on the nightstand. "Can I change it now, Mewanho?" she asked gently. He nodded weakly. She glanced at me standing in the doorway. For a moment our eyes met. I nodded once. She didn't need my permission, but maybe she needed my witness. Her hands moved carefully, reverently. She unwound the outer layer of gauze slowly, revealing the stained bandage underneath. The smell intensified, filling the room with something almost tangible. Noah winced. "I'm sorry, baby," she murmured. "Almost done." When she lifted the final layer, my breath caught. The wound was larger than I expected, an angry red crater on his scalp, the edges inflamed and glistening. But that wasn't what made my stomach lurch. Something moved. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. Then I saw it again. Tiny, pale shapes writhing in the moist tissue, burrowing, feeding. The sound in the room seemed to fade, replaced by a roaring in my ears. Maria's face went pale. "Meu Deus," she whispered. "Oh, meu Deus." I stepped closer, covering my nose with the back of my hand. "Maria," I said quietly, "you were right." She swallowed hard, tears spilling over now. "I wish I wasn't." Noah whimpered. "It tickles," he whispered, "and burns." My chest clenched. Tickles and burns. How long had he been feeling that and trying to explain it, with the limited vocabulary of a frightened child? "Hold on, baby," Maria said, forcing her voice to be steady. "Just hold on." She reached for her phone with her free hand. "What are you doing?" I asked. "What they understand," she replied. "Proof." She took several photos, hands shaking. Each click of the camera felt like a small act of war against the indifference around her. Then she gently placed a clean cloth over the wound to protect it a little from the air. "We need to tell Ethan," I said. "Yes," she agreed. "And this time, he will listen, even if he doesn't want to." We found him in his office. The room was dim, lit mostly by the soft glow of a desk lamp. Papers were scattered across the wooden surface, mixed with medical reports, hospital invoices, and a framed photo of a smiling woman with Noah as a toddler in her arms. His late wife, I guessed. The pain in his eyes every time he glanced at the photo made more sense now. He looked up as we entered. "What is it?" he asked, impatience already creeping in. "I'm tired, Maria. I don't have the energy for another argument." She didn't flinch. "Then don't argue, senor, just look." She stepped forward and placed her phone on the desk. The screen lit up with the first photo. He glanced at it, annoyed at first. Then his expression changed. His eyes widened. His mouth fell slightly open. He picked up the phone with trembling fingers and swiped to the next image, then the next. The color drained from his face. What am I looking at?" he whispered, though he already knew. "That is Noah's head, Senor," Maria said softly. "Tonight, when I change the bandage." He stared at the images, at the tiny, wriggling shapes embedded in his son's flesh. His hands began to shake so badly that the phone rattled against the wood when he set it down. "No," he breathed. "No, no, no." He sank back into his chair, one hand clutching his chest. His breathing quickened. "They told me," he stammered. "They told me it was infection. They said it was his immune system. They ran tests. How could they miss this?" "Maybe they didn't," Maria said quietly. He looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" She hesitated, then spoke with the kind of courage that only comes when fear has finally been outweighed by conviction. "It means, sir," she said, voice steady but gentle, "that sometimes people see things and choose not to name them, because naming them would force them to act, and acting might mean less money, less control, less protocol." Silence followed her words, heavy, explosive. Reflection. In that moment, Ethan wasn't just looking at a medical horror. He was looking at the price of blind trust and the true cost of his son's suffering. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "Get the car," he barked. "Now, we're going to the hospital." "Wait," Maria said, her voice suddenly urgent. "We need to cover his head well, and we need to keep him calm. If he senses our fear, it will make everything worse." He paused, then nodded quickly. "Fine, do what you have to do, just—" His voice cracked. "Just don't let him be alone. Not tonight." Maria's eyes softened. "He won't be," she promised. "I'll be with him, all the way." As they rushed to prepare Noah for the hospital, I felt something shift inside that house. For the first time, Ethan wasn't clinging to the polished comfort of professional assurances. He was clinging to a woman in a simple uniform, a woman whose only credentials were a lifetime of paying attention to pain, and a faith that wouldn't let her stay silent. The storm had finally broken. And at its center was a boy whose wound was no longer just a medical problem, but evidence of a system that had failed him at every possible turn. The drive to the hospital felt like a scene from a movie played without music. Rain finally began to fall, streaking the car windows with long trails of water. The windshield wipers moved back and forth in a relentless rhythm, clearing the view and then blurring it again. The city lights shimmered through the wet glass, red, white, gold, stretching into nervous lines as we sped through intersections. Noah lay across the back seat, his head resting on Maria's lap. She held him gently, one hand on his shoulder, the other hovering over the cloth covering his wound. She whispered soft reassurances in his ear, occasionally slipping into her native language when English felt too small for the comfort she wanted to give. "It's going to be okay, meu amor," she murmured. "We're going to a place where they have everything they need, and this time they will see." He nodded faintly, eyes half closed, face pale under the dim overhead light. Ethan sat in the front passenger seat, twisted halfway around so he could keep looking at his son. His tie hung loose around his neck, his shirt collar open. The polished billionaire mask was gone. All that remained was a father on the edge of panic. At the hospital, the emergency entrance doors slid open with a soft hiss as we approached. The smell hit us immediately. Antiseptic, floor cleaner, a faint hint of metal and human anxiety. Bright fluorescent lights flooded everything in hard white. Nurses and technicians moved quickly as Ethan shouted for help, his voice cracking. "My son," he called. "He has a head wound that's been infected for months. We just discovered—" His voice broke. "We just discovered there are things inside." Professionals in scrubs surrounded Noah, asking rapid questions, checking his vitals, pushing his stretcher down the hallway. Maria clung to the side rail, refusing to let go of his hand. A nurse tried to redirect her. "Family only," she began. "He is my family," Maria said firmly, surprising even herself. "I am the one who cares for him every day. I am the one who found this. I'm not leaving him." The nurse paused, reading the fear and steel in her eyes, then nodded once. "Fine. Stay close. Don't get in the way." We reached a treatment room. The curtains swished closed behind us. The smell of disinfectant intensified. A doctor entered, a man in his 50s with graying hair at his temples and the kind of tired eyes that had seen too many crises. His badge read Dr. Keller. "What seems to be the issues?" he asked, tone brisk but not unkind. Ethan thrust Maria's phone toward him. "This," he said, voice tight. "This is the issue." And the fact that it took almost a year for someone to notice it. The doctor's gaze dropped to the screen. As he flipped through the images, his expression shifted from clinical detachment to shock. "Dear God," he murmured, This is myiasis." The word hung in the air like a sentence. "Larval infestation," he clarified quickly. "From flies. This is severe." Ethan's hands clenched. How does something like this happen under the care of 3 different specialists and one of the most expensive clinics in this city? He demanded. "How does my son end up with this in his head while I'm paying for the best?" Dr. Keller met his gaze evenly. "That's a question for those specialists," he said. "Right now, my concern is your son. We need to take him into a procedure room immediately. We have to remove the larvae, clean the wound thoroughly, and assess how much tissue is damaged." Noah whimpered. "I don't want surgery," he whispered. Maria leaned closer. "Listen to me, Noah," she said softly. "They're not going to hurt you to hurt you. They're going to hurt you to help you. Do you trust me?" He looked into her eyes. After a long, trembling moment, he nodded. Reflection. Trust doesn't come from degrees, offices, or titles. It comes from who held your hand when it hurt most. As they prepared him for the procedure, nurses gently moved Maria aside. "You can't come in," one of them explained. "Not for this, but you can wait right here." Maria pressed her hand over her heart. "I'll be praying," she whispered to Noah. "The whole time. I promise." He gave her a tiny, brave thumbs up before the doors swung shut. The waiting room outside was a strange kind of limbo. Hard plastic chairs lined the walls, their surfaces cool under the hospital's aggressive air conditioning. A TV in the corner played some late-night talk show with the volume turned down, a laughing host frozen in a silent joke. The smell of coffee from a vending machine drifted through the air, mixing with disinfectant and exhaustion. Ethan paced. He walked back and forth across the worn linoleum, his shoes squeaking slightly with each step. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages, emails, missed calls. He didn't answer. He didn't sit. He just walked, like a man trying to outrun the thoughts in his head. "This should never have happened," he muttered. "I paid them. I trusted them. They told me it was under control. For months. For months." He stopped suddenly, turning to Maria. "You tried to warn me," he said, voice raw. "Didn't you?" She lowered her eyes. "I mentioned my suspicion," she said quietly. "You were not ready to hear it." He closed his eyes, pain twisting his features. "No," he whispered. "I was not." He sat down heavily in the chair beside her, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. For a long time, the only sounds were the distant beep of monitors and the rustle of paper at the reception desk. Then he spoke again, his voice barely audible. "You know what the first doctor told me," he said. He said, "Mr. Marlowe, you're doing everything right. You brought him to us early. This is just a stubborn infection. We'll keep monitoring it." He laughed bitterly. "Monitoring. That's the word they used while maggots were eating my son alive." Maria's eyes glistened. "In my village," she said softly, "we had one clinic for many miles. We had little equipment, but we had eyes. We looked closely. We paid attention to smell, to color, to the way a wound changed. We didn't have fancy machines. We had humility. Maybe that is what they are missing here." He let out a shaky breath. "Do you think God is punishing me?" he asked suddenly. "For something? For being too busy? For not seeing what was right in front of me?" She shook her head firmly. "No, Senor. This is not punishment. This is consequence," she said gently, "of people choosing pride over listening, of you trusting the wrong voices. But God," her eyes softened, "He is the one who put that boy in your arms, and He is the one who put this," she gestured to herself, the uniform, her quiet presence, "inside your house. He gives chances. Sometimes we ignore them. Sometimes we finally listen." He stared at her for a long moment, thought, a billionaire and a maid sitting side by side in plastic chairs, finally stripped down to the only titles that matter, father and witness. Time stretched. Eventually, Dr. Keller emerged from the double doors, peeling off his gloves. His face was drawn but steady. "How is he?" Ethan demanded, jumping to his feet. The doctor took a breath. "He's stable," he said. "We removed a substantial number of larvae from the wound. The tissue damage is significant, but not irreparable. We've cleaned it thoroughly and started him on targeted antibiotics. He'll need monitoring, and there will likely be scarring. But he's out of immediate danger. Ethan's knees buckled. He reached for the nearest chair and sank into it, relief and horror battling across his face. Substantial number, he repeated weakly. How long would something like this take to develop? Dr. Keller's jaw tightened. Weeks, possibly months, he said. This didn't happen overnight. So every doctor who saw him during that time should have at least considered the possibility, Dr. Keller said carefully, particularly given the smell and the chronic nature of the wound. Rage flickered in Ethan's eyes. But they didn't, he said. They charged me for advanced protocols and complex care plans. They gave him cream and pills, and they let this grow in his head. The doctor didn't argue. Can I see him? Maria asked softly. Dr. Keller looked surprised, then nodded. Yes, he's asking for you, actually. Inside the recovery room, Noah lay with his head wrapped in fresh, clean bandages. His face was pale, but his breathing was steady. The antiseptic smell was sharp, but the foul rot was gone. Maria approached the bed slowly. His eyes fluttered open. You stayed? He whispered. Of course, she said, tears shining. Where else would I be? He managed a faint smile. It feels quieter, he murmured. In my head. She choked back a sob. That's because the bad guests are gone. He frowned slightly. Guests? Tiny ones, she said gently. They were not supposed to be there. The doctors and your father and we made sure they left. He seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. Thank you, he whispered, for telling the truth. Her hand shook as she brushed a stray hair from his forehead. Always, meu anjo, she said. Always. Behind her, Ethan watched from the doorway. He saw the way his son's eyes softened when they rested on Maria. He saw the trust there, the comfort, the safety, and for the first time, he truly understood. She hadn't just been taking care of his house. She had been guarding his child. When Noah drifted back to sleep, Ethan stepped into the room. He looked at Maria for a long moment. I owe you an apology, he said quietly, and more than that. She opened her mouth to protest, but he lifted a hand. You saw what none of us saw, he continued. You believed what none of us wanted to believe. You pushed when it could have cost you everything. I told you not to speak, and you spoke anyway. You saved my son's life. Her eyes filled again. I just did what any mother, any person of faith would do, she said. No, he said. You did what I, with all my money and power, was too blind and too proud to do. He ran a hand over his face, emotion cracking his voice. I need you to do something for me, he said. When this is over, when he's stronger, I want you to help me tell this story. All of it. Not just about my son. About the doctors. The negligence. The way the system failed us. I want people to know that sometimes the person who saves your life is the one you're paid to ignore. She stared at him, stunned. Will you help me? He asked. She nodded slowly. Yes, she said. If it means no other child has to go through this, yes. Reflection. Justice doesn't always start in courtrooms. Sometimes it starts in hospital corridors, in the quiet decision of a father to finally believe the maid. The months that followed were not easy, but they were honest. Noah stayed in the hospital for several weeks under close observation. The staff monitored his wound, ensuring the infestation was completely resolved and that the tissue was healing properly. Slowly, the angry red crater softened. Healthy pink flesh began to reclaim the space where rot had once lived. Maria visited almost every day. She brought small comforts, a soft blanket that smelled like home, a little wooden cross from her grandmother, a handful of colored pencils and a sketchbook. She taught Noah to draw his feelings when words felt too heavy. Sometimes he drew monsters, black and twisting. Other times he drew a small house with 3 figures, a tall man, a boy, and a woman in a dress with an apron, all holding hands. One morning I arrived to find Ethan standing by the window of Noah's room, looking out at the city. The sky was clear, the sun bright. Cars moved below like tiny pieces on a board. No flights, he said without turning. No meetings, no conferences. I cancelled everything. Your board must be thrilled, I said. He let out a small, humorless laugh. They're furious. They say I can't afford to disappear right now, that the market is volatile, that investors get nervous, but I almost lost my son while I was too busy watching numbers rise and fall. Let them be nervous. He turned to me, and I saw a different man than the one I'd met weeks before. His suit was less precise. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there, but there was also a softness, a humility that no amount of money could have bought. "How is he today?" I asked. "Better," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "He laughed this morning. At a stupid joke Maria made. I hadn't heard him laugh like that in months." The sound of that laugh drifted into the hallway just then. Light, fragile, but real. Maria's laughter followed, warm and full. "They want us in the conference room at 3, he continued. "Hospital administration, lawyers. They're going to discuss what happened." His fingers flexed. "They'll try to use big words to cover small hearts." "Will you let them?" I asked. He looked at me sharply. "Not this time." Later that day we sat in a sterile conference room with glass walls. Hospital administrators in suits and doctors in white coats shuffled papers and cleared their throats. A tray of untouched bottled water sat in the center of the table, labels lined up perfectly. They presented charts, timelines, treatment plans. They used phrases like rare complication, unanticipated progression, unusual presentation. They avoided one word: negligence. Ethan listened quietly at first. Then he pulled out Maria's phone. "Before we talk about rare complications," he said, "let's talk about this." He projected the photos of Noah's wound onto the screen, filling the room with magnified images of writhing larvae embedded in his scalp. A murmur rippled across the table. Some faces turned away. Others flushed. "This is my son," he said, voice steady. "This is what was growing in his head while I was paying you thousands and thousands of dollars a month." "Mr. Marlowe," one administrator began smoothly, "with respect, my IASIS is indeed a rare, and yet a maid with no medical degree recognized it before any of you did." Ethan cut in sharply. She smelled the change. She saw signs. She tried to be heard. She was dismissed. Silence. Reflection. The truth didn't need a scalpel. It needed a screen, a voice, and the courage to say, "This is what you did." He continued. "You told me repeatedly that his wound was a stubborn infection. You prescribed creams, pills. You recommended more procedures under anesthesia. You spoke like this was a complex mystery only your expertise could unravel. But the moment you finally truly looked, the answer was obvious. This was not invisible. It was alive." The chief surgeon shifted uncomfortably. "In our defense, the presentation was—" "In your defense?" Ethan repeated, incredulous. "My 10-year-old had maggots in his head. We are not here to discuss your defense. We are here to discuss your responsibility." Another administrator cleared his throat. "Mr. Marlowe, we understand your anger." "You do not," Ethan said calmly. "But you will, because I am not going to bury this under a settlement. I'm not going to sign a confidentiality agreement so you can go on missing the obvious in other children. You will review your protocols. You will retrain your staff. You will make it mandatory to rule out conditions like myiasis in chronic wounds. And you will hear from my lawyers." They exchanged nervous glances. "And one more thing," he added. "You will recognize her." He gestured toward Maria, who sat quietly at the end of the table, hands folded in her lap. She looked out of place among the tailored suits and starched coats, but she was the most necessary person in that room. "She is the one who saved him," Ethan said. "Not your reports, not your billing codes, not your protocols. She saw what you didn't. She had the courage to keep pushing when we all told her to be quiet. If you're serious about improving care, you'll listen to people like her, the ones who actually touch the patients, the ones who sit beside them at 2 in the morning when the pain won't let them sleep." Maria stared at the table, cheeks flushed. Tears slipped down her face silently. "I'm just—" she began. "Don't say just," Ethan interrupted gently. "Never again." The administrators took notes. They made promises. Whether they would keep them or not, none of us knew. But one thing had changed irrevocably. The story was no longer theirs to control. It belonged to a boy who had survived something unspeakable, to a father who had finally chosen humility over pride, and to a maid whose quiet faith had moved mountains, or at least moved a very rich man to open his eyes. Months later, I sat in the Marlowe mansion again, this time in a very different house. The silence was gone. Morning sunlight poured through open curtains, casting golden rectangles on the floor. The smell of fresh coffee and pancakes drifted from the kitchen. Somewhere down the hall, music played softly, an old song from Maria's country, lilting and warm. Noah ran through the living room laughing, a superhero cape tied around his shoulders. A faint, pale scar peeked out from under his hair when he turned his head, but it no longer defined him. It was just a mark. a reminder of what he'd survived. "Careful," Ethan called, but he was smiling, really smiling. He sat on the couch in jeans and a simple shirt, a mug of coffee in his hands. His laptop was nowhere in sight. Maria stepped out of the kitchen with a plate of pancakes, her apron dusted with flour. She laughed as Noah zoomed past her, narrowly avoiding collision. "Breakfast first, Heroi," she called. "Even superheroes need to eat." He skidded to a stop, then ran back and threw his arms around her waist. "You're my favorite superhero," he said into her apron. Her eyes shone. "And you are my miracle," she replied. Ethan watched them, emotion tightening his throat. He caught my eye and nodded. "Did you ever think it would look like this?" I asked him quietly later when we stepped outside for some air. The garden smelled of damp earth and blooming flowers. A gentle breeze played with the leaves. "No," he admitted. "I thought healing would look like a new experimental drug, or a brilliant surgeon walking into the room with a breakthrough. I thought money could speed it up or force it. I never imagined it would come through a woman quietly folding laundry and praying under her breath." He looked toward the house where Maria's voice drifted out in a soft hum as she cleaned up breakfast dishes. "I spent years buying expert opinions," he said, "but it was the maid who saw my son as more than a case. She saw his pain, she listened to it. She risked everything to follow what she believed God was showing her. I used to think power meant being the richest man in the room." He smiled faintly. "Now I know better." Reflection. Real power isn't the ability to buy silence. It's the courage to face the truth, no matter who speaks it. We walked back inside. Noah was sitting at the table drawing. I glanced at the paper. 3 figures again. A man, a boy, and a woman holding hands. But this time, there was something else above them. Not a wound, not monsters. A bright, messy, yellow blob. "What's that?" I asked, pointing. He grinned. "The sun," he said. "It's finally out." His words hit me harder than I expected. Later, as I sat down to write this story, I thought about all the headlines that could have been written. "Billionaire sues hospital for negligence." "Rare case of myiasis found in child's scalp." "Top clinic under investigation." All technically true, all missing the heart of it, so I chose a different way to tell it. I chose to tell you about a boy whose wound wouldn't heal, a father who trusted the wrong voices, and a maid of faith who refused to ignore the smell of decay and the whisper of God in her chest. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more emotional stories. Tell us in the comments what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Remember, every life is priceless, and sometimes the greatest miracles come from the humblest hearts. If it were your child, would you choose your image or the truth that could save their life?